She was freezing at the bus stop in the middle of a snowstorm, until a billionaire pulled over and said, "You're coming with me." What happened next? No one, not even she, could have expected. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Snow fell with a kind of finality that New Yorkers rarely respected. Usually, no amount of ice or wind could slow the pace of the city, but tonight the streets were deserted, as if the world had paused mid-breath. The snowfall was relentless, blanketing sidewalks, cabs, and brownstone rooftops with heavy silence. Streetlights flickered behind a veil of frost, glowing dimly like forgotten lanterns. Ethan Carrington adjusted the steering wheel with one hand as he guided his black Jaguar slowly down Fifth Avenue. The wipers groaned against the windshield, barely keeping up with the storm. Inside the car, it was warm, quiet, sterile. Just the hum of the engine and the faint rhythm of the snow falling around him. He didn't know why he was out. He could have stayed in his penthouse on Central Park West, surrounded by curated art, glass, and silence. But nights like this made the walls of his home feel too close and his mind too loud. So he drove. It had become a habit over the years, these aimless midnight drives, a way to pretend he was searching for something without having to name what it was. As he turned onto 76th Street, he noticed a bus stop on the corner near a shuttered deli. It would have been invisible, a blur in the storm, if not for the figure sitting beneath the flickering light. He tapped the brakes. There, huddled on the frozen bench, was a woman. She sat stiffly, her knees pulled tight, arms wrapped around herself. Her hospital scrubs were soaked through, the pale blue fabric darkening with moisture. Snow clung to her braids and eyelashes, and her shoes, cheap sneakers, looked more suited for autumn than a night like this. Her phone was limp in her hand, its screen dark. Her body trembled, but her expression was still. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't belong out there. He pulled to the curb and slipped the gear into park. Without thinking, he opened the door and stepped out. The cold knifed through his coat instantly, but he didn't flinch. His leather shoes crunched on the snow as he crossed the short distance between his car and the bus stop. She didn't look up until he spoke. "Hey, you're coming with me." Her eyes widened instantly, alarmed. She shifted back slightly on the bench. "Excuse me?" Ethan stopped a few feet from her. His voice was calm, steady. "I'm not leaving you here to freeze." Her brows pulled together. "I don't know you." "I'm aware," he replied. She stood up slowly, instinctively putting distance between them. "I'm waiting for the bus." "There's no next bus," he said, glancing down the empty street. The city shut everything down. No trains, no cabs, nothing's moving out here tonight. She crossed her arms tightly, biting her bottom lip. "I can figure it out." He didn't move closer, but his eyes didn't leave hers. "You're standing in wet scrubs in a blizzard. You're shivering, and I have a heated car 10 feet away." She hesitated. "My name is Ethan. I'm not a threat," he said. "You can sit in the back. I'll take you wherever you need to go." She looked at him again. Really looked. Something about his face tickled the edge of recognition, though she couldn't place it. Maybe it was the sharp lines of his jaw or the expensive cut of his coat, but he looked like someone out of a finance magazine. A man who belonged behind glass walls, not in the snow talking to a stranger. Still, there was no menace in his voice. No pity, just something unexpected. Steadiness. She didn't want to trust him, but her body gave the answer before her mind could finish its argument. She nodded once. "Fine." He opened the passenger door for her, stepping aside. She got in without another word. Inside the Jaguar, warmth wrapped around her like a second skin. She sank into the leather seat, still cautious, but her limbs already relaxing from the bite of the cold. She looked through the foggy window and saw him circle in the hood. Then he slid into the driver's seat, adjusted the heat again, and pulled away from the curb. For a while, neither of them spoke. Just the low hum of the heater and the rhythmic crunch of snow under the tires. She finally broke the silence. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said, his eyes still on the road. "You were freezing." "Still, most people wouldn't have stopped." "I'm not most people." She let out a quiet breath, unsure if it was meant to be arrogant or simply honest. He asked, "Where do you live?" "East Harlem," she said. He winced. "Too far. Roads are blocked north of the park. We'll never make it." "I'll be fine." "No," he said, not sharply but with finality. "You're not going back out in that." She turned toward him, narrowing her eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "You stay at my place tonight. It's 10 minutes from here. Guest room. Lock the door if you want. I'll even make you tea." She blinked at him. His jaw was tense, but his voice was soft. "It's just one night. I'm not letting you go back out there." Maya's mind raced. Every rule she'd learned: never trust a stranger, don't get in expensive cars, don't go to rich men's homes. But exhaustion pulled at her bones like gravity. She'd been on shift for 13 hours, missed lunch, carried a patient up 2 flights of stairs when the elevator broke. She had no one waiting at home, just a 1-bedroom apartment with broken heat and a faucet that wouldn't stop leaking. She looked at him again. His eyes were on the road, but his hands were steady, his expression unreadable. "All right," she said quietly. When they arrived, Ethan pulled into an underground garage. The floor was polished concrete, the walls lined with soft light. An elevator opened directly from the garage into the lobby of his building. "This is where you live?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "For now," he said. They stepped into the elevator. She caught her reflection in the mirrored panel. Wet hair, tired eyes, pale lips. She looked like someone who didn't belong in a place like this. Inside the penthouse, everything was warm. Soft lights, floor-to-ceiling windows, a fireplace already glowing. "Room on the left," he said, pointing down a hallway. "There are clean clothes in the dresser. They'll be big, but they're warm." She turned toward him. "Why are you doing this?" He paused. "Because I can, and because I have a conscience." That answer clung to her as she entered the guest room. The bed was neatly made. The sheets smelled like lavender. Everything was too perfect, too silent. But it didn't feel dangerous. It felt careful. 15 minutes later, Maya emerged wearing an oversized hoodie and joggers. She moved toward the kitchen, intending to ask for water, but froze when she saw him. Ethan was standing at the stove, stirring something. She blinked. "You cook?" He glanced over his shoulder. "It's just ramen. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." She hesitated. "You're full of surprises." He set a bowl on the counter and slid a pair of chopsticks beside it. "Eat." She did. It was salty, a little spicy, and comforting in a way she hadn't expected. They didn't say much, but it was enough. When she finished, she whispered, "Not what I expected." He looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "Neither are you." That night, Maya lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muting the world in thick silence. She thought of the man asleep in the next room, his strange kindness, his quiet, his storm-colored eyes. She didn't know who he was, but something about that night had shifted her world, and she had a feeling it had shifted his too. The soft glow of dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long amber streaks across the wooden floors. Outside, the city still lay in the quiet grip of snow. For once, New York was hushed, subdued under the weight of a storm that hadn't yet passed. Maya sat on the edge of the guest bed, her feet tucked beneath her, wrapped in the warmth of the oversized hoodie Ethan had lent her. Her eyes roamed the unfamiliar space, the tastefully minimal decor, the absence of clutter, the quiet hum of a penthouse far removed from the chaos she was used to. Everything felt expensive, yet strangely impersonal. She stood and walked toward the window, watching flakes drift lazily toward the street. Then, drawn by the faint smell of coffee, she padded out into the hallway barefoot. The silence in the apartment wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, intentional. Every corner whispered of someone who needed space, not company. When she reached the kitchen, a fresh mug sat on the counter, steam curling upward like a gentle invitation. She paused. "I didn't know how you'd take it," came Ethan's voice from the other room. Maya turned to see him walking in from what looked like a small library. He'd changed into a soft navy sweater and dark slacks. His hair was slightly damp from a recent shower. The sight of him, effortless, collected, made her suddenly aware of her own bare feet and tangled braids. "Black is fine," she said, reaching for the mug. He nodded and leaned against the opposite counter, arms crossed. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "Better than I have in weeks." There was a moment of comfortable stillness between them. Then she asked the question that had been forming all morning. "Why was there already a fire lit when we arrived last night?" He shrugged slightly. "I leave it going most nights. I like the quiet it makes." "You light it? For the sound?" "It's less lonely than silence." That caught her off guard. They stood there a moment, holding mugs that had grown too warm in their hands. Finally, she asked, "You live alone?" "Yes." His answer was immediate, clipped. "No family?" He hesitated. "None close. My mother died when I was a kid. Father doesn't really count." "I'm sorry." He nodded once, like it was something he'd long made peace with. Maya looked away, unsure whether to keep digging, but something about him made her want to ask more. Not out of curiosity, out of instinct. He wasn't cold. He was layered, controlled. "What do you do?" she asked carefully, even though she was already starting to guess. "Healthcare investments," he said simply. "I own a few clinics, R&D, pharmaceuticals. That's a lot. It keeps me busy. And this place, it's temporary." He gave a small smile. "I buy silence wherever I can find it." She tilted her head. "That sounds sad." "It's not always." She studied him. "You don't talk much, do you?" He raised an eyebrow. "And you do?" She chuckled. Point taken. After breakfast, he offered to drive her home. The streets had started to clear, but the snowbanks still piled high along the sidewalks. She gave him her address and watched as he entered it into the car's GPS. Not that he seemed to need it. He drove in silence, classical music playing faintly from the speakers. They pulled up to a modest brownstone in East Harlem. Maya hesitated before opening the door. "Thank you," she said again, "for last night, and this morning, and the ramen." He looked at her, his face unreadable. "You don't need to thank me." "But I want to." She stepped out of the car and onto the snowy curb. Then she paused, turned back, and asked, "Will I ever see you again?" His fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "That's not up to me." Their eyes met, and then she was gone. The apartment felt emptier than usual that evening, Ethan sat in his office staring out at the skyline beyond the glass. The picture of his mother sat where it always had, beside the leather notebook he never used. Her photo was old, blurry. She was wearing her nurse's uniform, standing outside the tiny clinic she'd worked at until the day she collapsed. Her smile had been wide, even though she was exhausted. Maya had worn nearly the same uniform. He'd noticed that before anything else. The way her hands trembled slightly in the cold, the tiredness in her eyes. She was a stranger, but somehow she wasn't. She reminded him of everything he'd tried not to remember. He didn't tell her that. He couldn't. Not yet. The next few days passed like they always did. Meetings, phone calls, endless decisions about stock options, budgets, acquisitions. But his focus wavered. He caught himself checking the weather forecast more often. Found himself watching street corners as his car passed, wondering if she might be there again. She wasn't. Then, on the fourth day, he saw her. It wasn't planned. He had agreed, reluctantly, to appear at a donor event hosted by one of the clinics he funded, a health fair held in a community gymnasium on the Lower East Side. Normally, he made an anonymous donation and stayed out of sight. But something had pulled him there that day. And there she was. Across the room, Maya was kneeling beside an elderly woman, gently adjusting a blood pressure cuff on her arm. Her expression was focused, tender. The room bustled around her, but she moved with quiet purpose. There were no cameras, no applause, just her and the woman. Ethan stood still, watching, unmoving. She didn't see him until the crowd thinned. Their eyes met. She froze mid-step. "You followed me?" she asked when she reached him. Her tone was light, but her eyes searched his. "No," he said. "I fund this clinic. You don't exactly look like the crowd here. I don't always want to look like who I am." She crossed her arms. "And who is that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Why do you do this, even after 14-hour shifts?" Her response was immediate. "Because someone needs to, and I know what it's like to have no one." He nodded slowly. "My mother was a nurse," he said. "She used to bring me to places like this. I hated it. But now, I think I understand why she did." Maya tilted her head. "You never mentioned that." "There's a lot I don't mention." She looked at him closely. "Well, I'm glad you came." He shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. "Want to get coffee?" She hesitated for a second, then smiled. "Sure." Later that evening, they walked side by side down a quiet street, steaming cups in hand. They didn't talk about money, or work, or anything remarkable. They talked about insomnia, about soup too salty in hospital cafeterias, about books they'd started but never finished. The world slowed down around them, and somewhere between her laughter and the frost on their coffee lids, Ethan began to feel something crack open inside him. Not something he could name, but something. The next few weeks unfolded like a story no one had written down, but both remembered. They didn't plan their meetings, yet they kept happening. Quiet, scattered across the city like whispers in a language only they understood. Sometimes Ethan would appear in the hospital cafeteria just as Maya was leaving a night shift, standing with a paper bag in hand containing the blueberry muffins she liked. Other times, she'd step into a car after work and find a driver waiting, courtesy of a text she never saw, with a quiet destination and Ethan already there, seated at a bench near the East River or in the back corner of a bookstore cafe. They didn't call it anything. Not dating, not friendship, it was presence. Wordless and grounding, a steady hum of a connection neither of them had intended but neither dared disturb. Still, Beneath Maya's calm was a quiet curiosity. She knew almost nothing about him. His life was a series of hints, his impossibly tailored coats, the sleek cars, the way doormen straightened when he passed. She had once overheard a resident doctor mention Carrington Biotech and the money they poured into rare disease research. And once, while scrolling past a Forbes article in the hospital break room, she saw his photo. She had stared at it for nearly a minute. Ethan Carrington. Net worth, $4.2 billion. Founder and CEO of Carrington Health, but in person he never mentioned any of it. He spoke like a man who had everything but no interest in showing it. That only made her more curious. One Friday evening, after a long shift, Maya found herself curled up on a bench near the Metropolitan Museum. Ethan sat beside her, arms crossed, gazing at the city lights without speaking. The snow had finally melted into gray slush, and the spring air carried a quiet chill. "I saw your photo in a magazine," she said softly. He didn't respond at first. Then, "I figured you would. Why didn't you tell me who you were?" "I didn't want it to matter, but it does." He looked at her then. "Does it change what you see when you look at me?" "No," she answered truthfully, "but I still deserve to know." Ethan stared ahead. "I've spent a long time being someone people only want for one thing: my signature, my money, a favor. I'm not those people." "I know," he said, turning to her. "That's what makes this harder." They sat in silence. Then Maya said, "I've worked since I was 16. I've paid rent I couldn't afford. I've skipped meals to buy my textbooks. I don't need your money, Ethan, but I do need honesty." He nodded once. "Fair. I'm not afraid of what you are. I'm afraid of what you hide." That silenced him. Later that night, Ethan stood alone in his penthouse watching the city through the tall windows. The glow of Manhattan reflected off the glass, but he barely noticed. His eyes were locked on a photograph. It had sat in the same spot for years, framed in black wood, resting on a side table near the fireplace. The picture was fading now, the colors turning to sepia with time. A woman stood in front of a small hospital, smiling through exhaustion. Her badge read Marianne Carrington, RN. His mother. The only person who had ever given him love without asking anything in return. She had died when he was 12, taken by a degenerative disease so rare most doctors hadn't known how to treat it. His father had withdrawn, burying himself in financial reports and stock options. Ethan had been sent to a boarding school 3 weeks after her funeral. From that day forward, silence became his only language. He built empires in quiet, avoided vulnerability like a disease. He learned how to close doors, not open them. But Maya, she was different. She reminded him of his mother in ways that haunted him. The calm presence, the way she touched people when she spoke to them, the fire in her voice when she defended her patients, even if they were strangers. She gave everything and asked for nothing. She was everything he'd never dared reach for. The next day, Ethan sat in his office at Carrington Health headquarters, dressed in gray, surrounded by glass walls and assistants who whispered when they walked past. But he wasn't reading the merger brief in front of him. He was watching a live feed of a conference happening 10 blocks away, an emergency care symposium. Maya was speaking on stage, passionately discussing burnout in low-income hospitals. He had rerouted his meetings just to watch her. Later that afternoon, he signed an anonymous agreement, a scholarship for minority nursing students at the same school Maya had attended. Another wire went out for a donation to her hospital's outreach fund. No names, no press. He didn't do it to impress her. He did it because she was holding the system together with her bare hands, just like his mother once did. And he would not let her fall. Maya, for her part, had no idea how closely he followed her world. She thought he simply showed up when he could, quiet and observant. She didn't know about the nights he had his driver park near her hospital to watch her walk inside safely, or the time he called in a favor to move her landlord to reduce her rent after the heating failed. All she saw was the man who never crossed the line, but never pulled away. The man who listened more than he spoke, who sent her tea when she was sick, who once sat outside her building in the rain just to make sure she didn't have to wait alone for a cab. He didn't speak in romantic gestures. He spoke in presence. But there was a wall. She could feel it. She noticed the way he never invited her to stay, never touched her hand, even in passing. When she sat beside him on the couch, his body stayed still as stone. He never said he missed her, never leaned in, never asked her to stay longer. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he didn't know how to show it. And slowly, that wall began to wear on her. One night, after a long shift, Maya came back to his apartment. The lights were dim, her favorite tea steeping on the counter. A soft playlist hummed in the background, but Ethan wasn't there. She found him in his office, standing before the window, both hands pressed to the glass. On the desk behind him sat the photo of his mother. Her own photo stood beside it now, one he had taken when she wasn't looking. She was laughing, holding a cup of coffee, wind lifting her braids. She stepped inside. You always look at her when something's wrong. Ethan didn't turn. It helps me remember. Remember what? That people like her, like you, still exist. Maya swallowed hard, her voice dropped. Ethan, what are we doing? He finally looked at her. What do you mean? This. She gestured to the apartment. The tea, the silence. We spend time together. We talk, we eat, but we don't exist. Not really. His jaw tightened. You're here, aren't you? That's not what I mean. Her voice cracked. You never ask me to stay. You never say you care. I don't even know if I'm a guest or... You're not a guest. Then what am I? He didn't answer. She stepped closer, heart pounding. I love you, Ethan. The words hung in the air. He froze, but he didn't say it back. And that's when she knew. She smiled sadly, tears threatening. You don't have to say it, but I can't keep doing this with a man who can't decide if he's allowed to feel. She turned and left the room. That night, she packed her things. He didn't stop her. The sound of the door closing echoed in the penthouse like a final note from a symphony that had never begun. Ethan stood in the hallway, still holding the scarf she left behind. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. It had been 22 days since Maya left. Ethan Carrington could account for every single one, not in dates, but in absences, in the quiet echo of steps that were no longer heard in the hallway, in the way the tea remained untouched in the pantry, in the silence of the piano, which he hadn't opened since the night she disappeared behind a closing door. He tried to pretend life continued. Meetings still took place. Stock still climbed. Memos were still approved. But something was off. He couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't look at his own apartment without hearing her voice somewhere in the corners. The nights were longer now, not because of time, but because of what they lacked. The warmth, the smell of her cocoa butter lotion in the guest bathroom, the sound of her laughter when he admitted he'd never learned to properly use a microwave. His assistant noticed first. She knocked on his office door gently one Monday morning. "Sir, The Tokyo board is waiting for your confirmation." Ethan didn't respond. He was staring at a photograph on his desk, the one of Maya, taken on a spring morning in Central Park. She had been mid-laugh, the light catching her braids, a coffee cup in hand. She didn't know he had taken it. "Mr. Carrington?" The assistant tried again. He didn't blink. "Cancel it," he said quietly. "Cancel. Tokyo?" "Yes, cancel the meeting." She paused. "Should I reschedule?" "No," he interrupted. "Just cancel." He stood up, grabbed his coat, and left without another word. He went to the hospital first, the one where she used to work. It was cold again, spring having retreated briefly to give winter one last curtain call. The sidewalks shimmered with frost, and the sky hung heavy with low-hanging clouds. Ethan entered the ER waiting room, shoulders tense beneath his wool coat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and nurses hustled past, too busy to notice him. He approached the reception desk. "I'm looking for Maya Brooks." The woman at the desk typed rapidly, then frowned. "Transferred 2 weeks ago." His heart dropped. "Transferred where?" "She didn't leave a forwarding address. Sorry. Are you family?" He hesitated. "No," he said after a pause. "I guess not." He stepped outside. The wind cut across his face like truth. He wandered into the courtyard where patients sometimes waited for rides. The trees were bare, benches cold. Snow fell lightly around him, silent and indifferent. He looked up at the sky. "She didn't even say goodbye," he whispered. Then, to no one at all. "She was the only thing that made me feel human." And the snow kept falling. A year passed. The city moved on, as cities always do. The news cycle shifted. Carrington Health expanded into Europe. Ethan was seen on magazine covers again. Solo, polished, unreadable, Maya had become the head nurse at a small hospital in upstate New York. She didn't tell anyone about the man with the gray eyes who once made her ramen at 2 a.m. She kept his memory tucked away, somewhere between grief and gratitude. On quiet nights, curled under a fleece blanket with tea in her hands, she still thought of him. Not as the billionaire. Not even as the man who couldn't say he loved her. But as the one who once saw her on a freezing bench and refused to let her disappear. She sometimes wondered if he ever looked for her. She never expected the answer to come on a random Tuesday in a flower shop. She was buying tulips, her aunt's favorite. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped in, brushing snow from her coat. She wandered the narrow aisles until she saw him. He stood with his back to her, lifting a stem of white tulips from a bucket, studying them with the same seriousness he once gave stock reports. Maya froze. He turned. Their eyes met. He looked older somehow, but softer, still tall, still composed. But now something in his posture had surrendered. He stepped forward, leaving the flowers behind. "You're coming with me," he said. The words echoed from a year ago, but this time they were not a command. They were a promise. "If you still want to," he added quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded. "I never stopped waiting." He stepped closer. His hand trembled slightly as it reached for hers. When their fingers intertwined, it was slow, reverent, like someone holding something fragile for the first time in a long while. He brought her home. Not to the penthouse. Not to marble floors and a fireplace lit by remote. To a quiet apartment on the edge of Central Park, filled with potted plants, sunlight, and little things that whispered her name. Her old mug on the shelf, her favorite blanket folded neatly on the couch. "You kept everything," she whispered. "I kept you," he replied. 6 months later, they were married in the restored garden of his childhood home. The guest list was small: friends, hospital staff, former patients. The elderly woman Maya once cared for during a community event sat in the front row. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan held the microphone with both hands, steadying himself. "I didn't know how to love before you," he said, "but every day with you I've learned. And I'll keep learning for as long as you'll let me." She smiled through tears and answered, "Then we'll learn together." That night, long after the candles flickered low and laughter faded into the walls of the house, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a single blanket, her head resting against his chest. A summer storm rolled quietly in the distance. "I never thought a freezing night at a bus stop would bring me home," she said softly. Ethan kissed the crown of her head. "That night," he whispered, "I didn't save you." He turned her face toward his, eyes full of something no longer silent. "You saved me." Sometimes the people who save us don't arrive in grand gestures. They come quietly, in a snowstorm, with a bowl of warm ramen, in the stillness of someone finally listening. Ethan Carrington built his life in silence. But Maya Brooks taught him how to live out loud, and in doing so, she didn't just warm his hands, she thawed his soul. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring tales. Leave a comment and let us know, where in the world are you watching from? We read every message,